3,200 acres. That's all it is. A rectangle of Oklahoma red dirt, measuring roughly 4 miles by 1¼ miles. If you drew it on a map, it would look like nothing. A small patch in a vast agricultural landscape. But measure it differently. Measure it in lives sustained. Measure it in generations fed. Measure it in families who didn't have to leave. Then it becomes something else entirely. This is the story of one piece of land and what it took to keep it. In 1956, this land was dying. Metaphorically, literally, the drought had turned the topsoil to powder. The wheat that should have been
Vast
growing
western pastures
lay
where natural
withered in
grasses
fields
thrive.
that
This
cracked
scale enables
like
efficient,
broken
high-productivity
pottery.
operations.
The grass the cattle needed had turned brown and brittle. The fruit trees dropped their leaves in June. The land was dying, and it was taking 10 families with it. Those families owned the land in pieces. The Turner property, the Johnson farm, the Reeves section, the Callahan acreage, the Merritt orchard, the Henderson dairy, the Pope ranch, the Vaughan spread, the Driscoll homestead.
Dawn breaks over the land, signaling unity and a new era of productivity. Real people, real machines, driving efficiency and growth.
10 separate futures,
This can't be
all
right. This is all
circling
one
the
piece.
same drain.
They said
James
separate plots.
Turner
This is
owned
everything. We have to work together
340
then.
acres in the eastern section. His grandfather had homesteaded it in 1891. 3 generations of Turners had worked that soil, planted that wheat, raised their children on that land. By the summer of 1956, James Turner was 3 months away from losing it all.
Keep planting.
Thomas
We need to
Johnson's
finish this section
280
before the rain.
acres
Watch that
sat
arm.
just
Swing it clear
north
to the
of
right.
Turner's
It's tough,
property.
but we're
He
gaining
had
on
4
it.
children.
3
and a
generations
fifth on
built
the way.
this. 340
His wife
acres
was
of pure
terrified.
productivity.
His bank
Our
account was
history
empty.
drives this.
His land
3
was worth
generations
less
built
every
this.
day.
We walk
The
every
drought
acre.
continued.
The machines keep
Sarah
the pace.
Merritt's orchard
Productivity is our
covered
legacy.
310 acres on the higher ground to the northwest. 20 years she had spent building that operation. 20 years of grafting and pruning and coaxing fruit from Oklahoma soil. The drought was killing her trees, killing her life's work. Each family had their own story. Each family was fighting their own battle, but they were all fighting on the same piece of land. That's what they didn't see at first. They saw property lines. They saw separate farms. They saw individual success or individual failure. They didn't see that the land didn't care about their boundaries. The drought didn't stop at fence lines. The bank crisis didn't respect property divisions. The future didn't distinguish between the Turner wheat and the Johnson cattle and the Merritt fruit. It was all one ecosystem, one water table, one market, one community, one piece of land. Margaret Turner saw it first. Not because she was smarter than anyone else, because she was desperate enough to look past the property lines her husband's family had drawn 3 generations earlier. She made phone calls. She told the truth. She broke the silence that pride creates. And when the other families finally admitted what they were facing, they discovered something that should have been obvious all along. They weren't 10 farms. They were 10 families on one piece of land. And that land could either destroy them separately or save them together. The meeting in the Turner barn lasted all night. 10 families, 23 adults, 31 children whose futures hung in the balance. The question on the table was simple and impossible. Could they erase the property lines? Could they take 10 separate farms and make them one? Could they share everything, the land, the equipment, the labor, the profits, the risks, equally? Could 10 proud, independent farming families surrender their individual ownership and become something else? Something that had no name, something that violated everything they had been taught about American agriculture. The arguments were fierce. Robert Vaughan said it was un-American. Mary Henderson said it was desperate. Sarah Merritt said it was the only option that made sense. By dawn, they had made a decision that would define the next 70 years. They would pool the land, all 200 acres. They would create a cooperative, equal ownership, equal responsibility, equal risk. They would treat the land as what it actually was, one piece of ground that didn't care who owned which section. The legal paperwork took a week. The lawyer who drew it up had never seen anything like it. 10 separate property deeds being dissolved, one collective ownership agreement being created, every acre, every building, every fence post becoming shared property. "You're either brilliant or insane," the lawyer said. They were neither. They were just finally seeing the land clearly. The first challenge was practical. How do you organize 3,200 acres of diverse Oklahoma land? How do you decide who does what? How do you manage wheat and cattle and orchards and vegetables as one operation? They walked the land together. All of it. Every section. They stopped seeing property lines and started seeing what the ground could do. The eastern sections, closer to the creek, had the best moisture retention. Wheat. The western pastures had natural grasses perfect for grazing. Cattle. The northern elevation had better drainage. Orchards. The southern flats were ideal for row crops. Vegetables, not Turner land or Johnson land or Merritt land, just land, being used for what it did best. James Turner took charge of the wheat operation because he understood wheat. Not because it was his family's traditional crop, but because the land needed someone who knew how to coax grain from difficult soil. Robert Vaughan managed the cattle because he knew grass and rotation and animal husbandry. The western pastures became his responsibility, not because he owned them, but because the land needed his expertise there. Sarah Merritt ran the orchard operation because she had spent 20 years learning how fruit trees survive in Oklahoma. The northern acres needed her knowledge more than they needed property lines. The land didn't care about tradition. It cared about competence. And for the first time, 10 families were organizing around what the land needed instead of what their boundaries allowed. The summer of 1956 tested everything. The drought continued. The harvest was terrible. They barely survived. But they survived as one operation, not 10. When the wheat failed, the cattle operation kept them alive. When the cattle prices dropped, the vegetables carried them through. The land itself taught them the first lesson of cooperation. Diversity creates resilience. No single crop, no single market, no single family can withstand every crisis, but a whole ecosystem, properly managed, can weather almost anything. The rain came back in April 1957. The land began to heal. The wheat grew green again. The cattle fattened on restored pastures. The fruit trees blossomed, and the 10 families faced a choice. The crisis was over. Should they dissolve the cooperative and return to individual ownership? They walked the land again, looked at it with the same clear eyes that the drought had forced them to open, and they saw what they hadn't seen before. The land worked better as one piece. The irrigation systems they had built together reached across old property lines, feeding sections that would have died alone. The equipment they had pooled moved efficiently across the entire operation instead of sitting idle on individual farms. The labor they shared allowed them to handle the harvest, the planting, the maintenance as a single coordinated effort. The land didn't want to be divided again, and neither did they. They voted unanimously. The cooperative would continue. The children who grew up on this land learned to see it differently than their parents had. They didn't remember property lines. They saw wheat fields that needed harvest, cattle that needed rotation, orchards that needed pruning, gardens that needed tending. Young Robert Turner worked the western pastures alongside Michael Johnson. The land didn't care whose grandfather had originally owned that section. It cared that the cattle were managed well. Susan Henderson and Linda Merritt learned the orchard operation together. The trees didn't distinguish between Henderson fruit and Merritt fruit. They just grew, or they didn't. This generation understood something their parents had to learn through crisis. Land doesn't belong to people in any meaningful sense. People belong to land. They're temporary stewards of something that will outlast them by centuries. In 1963, James Turner died. The land buried him and continued. The wheat still needed planting. The cooperative created a council system to ensure that no single person's loss would destabilize the operation. 7 elected members, democratic decisions, collective leadership. The land taught them another lesson. Succession is about systems, not individuals. Through the 1960s and 70s, the land watched industrial agriculture transform America, watched neighbors sell out to corporations, watched family farms become subdivisions, watched monoculture operations replace diversified farming. The Red Valley Cooperative's 3,200 acres stayed diverse, stayed resilient. When wheat prices crashed in 1974, the cooperative leaned on cattle and vegetables. When the cattle market collapsed in 1976, the orchard operation carried them through. When a late frost destroyed the fruit in 1979, wheat and vegetables saved the year. The land's diversity protected the families that protected the land. The second generation took over in the 1970s with new ideas: organic farming, sustainable agriculture, crop rotation patterns that built soil health instead of depleting it. They stopped seeing the land as something to extract from and started seeing it as something to maintain. The land responded, soil quality improved, water retention increased, yields stabilized at sustainable levels. The 3,200 acres became healthier in the cooperative's second decade than it had been before the drought. When Jennifer Turner wanted to go to law school in 1972, the cooperative faced a crisis. If the children left, who would care for the land? The solution they found was revolutionary: support education, require 5 years of return service, then grant freedom. Jennifer went to law school. She came back. She stayed. Not because she was forced to, but because she had learned to see the land the way her grandfather did, as something worth protecting. The 1980s farm crisis destroyed thousands of operations across America. High interest rates, crashing land values, foreclosures, bankruptcies. The Red Valley Cooperative survived because they carried minimal debt. They had grown the operation slowly, carefully, letting the land's productivity determine their pace rather than borrowed money. 3 neighboring farms joined the cooperative during those years, desperate families who finally understood what the cooperative had learned in 1956. Land survives better when boundaries dissolve. By 1990, the cooperative managed 4,000 acres. The land had grown, but more importantly, it had thrived. The third generation brought technology. Marcus Turner, growing up in the 1980s, saw possibilities his grandparents never imagined. Computers tracking soil conditions across all 4,000 acres. GPS-guided equipment managing fields with precision. Online markets connecting their products directly to consumers who cared about how land was treated. In 1995, Marcus proposed organic conversion. 3 years without chemicals. 3 years of transition. 3 years of treating the land with the respect organic certification requires. The older generation resisted, but the vote passed. The land began a 3-year healing process. No pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers, just careful management and patience. The land responded. By 1998, soil tests showed dramatic improvements. Organic matter increased, beneficial organisms returned. The 4,000 acres became not just productive, but genuinely healthy. And the market responded to land treated well. Premium prices, restaurant partnerships, consumers willing to pay for food grown on land that was being healed instead of exploited. The turn of the millennium brought new
Vast
members
western
to the
pastures where
cooperative.
natural grasses
Young
thrive.
people
This
who
scale enables
believed in
efficient,
sustainable
high-productivity
land
operations.
management, who saw the 4,500 acres as an ecosystem to steward, not a resource to extract. The land accepted them all. It didn't care about bloodlines or family history. It cared about competence and commitment and respect. In 2005, the cooperative debated partnering with a large agricultural corporation. The debate was fierce. But when
Dawn breaks
Sarah
over the land,
Johnson
signaling
read
unity
from
and a
her
new era of
grandfather
productivity.
Thomas's
Real
journal,
people, real machines,
his
driving
account of
efficiency
that
and
first
growth.
meeting in 1956 when
This
they
can't be
decided
right.
to
This is
treat
all
the
one
land
piece.
as one piece
They said
instead
separate
of
plots.
10.
This is everything.
The
We have to work
decision
together then.
became clear. They would keep the land independent, keep it whole, keep it healthy, even if that meant growing slower, even if that meant staying small. The land, they had learned, doesn't respond well to corporate extraction models. It responds to patient stewardship. The
Keep planting.
2008
We need to finish
financial
this section
crisis
before the
crashed
rain. Watch
land
that arm.
values
Swing it
across
clear to the
America.
right.
It's tough,
But the
but we're
cooperative's
gaining on it.
4,500
3 generations
acres
built
stayed
this.
productive,
340
stayed
acres of
healthy,
pure productivity.
stayed whole,
Our history
because
drives
they weren't
this.
leveraged,
3 generations
weren't
built
dependent
this.
on
We walk
credit,
every acre.
weren't
The
treating
machines
the
keep the
land as
pace.
collateral.
Productivity is
By
our legacy.
2010, they had weathered another crisis. The land had taught them another lesson. Resilience comes from freedom from debt. Today, the Red Valley Cooperative manages 4,500 acres of certified organic farmland. The land supports 17 families, employs 32 full-time workers, produces food that feeds thousands, and it does all this sustainably, regeneratively, healing a little more each year. The children of the cooperative learn to see land differently than most Americans. They learn that 4,500 acres isn't theirs in any possessive sense. They're temporary stewards of something much older and more permanent than their families. They learn that the land doesn't care about ownership. It cares about management, about respect, about patience, about understanding what each acre can do and what it needs. They learn that 3,200 acres was enough in 1956 and 4,500 acres is enough now. That success isn't measured in endless expansion, but in sustainable health. The land taught 10 families how to survive, and those families taught the land how to thrive. If you stand on any section of the Red Valley Cooperative's 4,500 acres today, you won't see property lines. You'll see wheat fields transitioning into pastures, pastures giving way to orchards, orchards bordered by vegetable gardens, all of it connected, all of it healthy, all of it managed as one ecosystem. Because that's what it is. One piece of land, 4,500 acres, one water table, one soil system, one community of families who learn to see it clearly. The fence lines are still there technically, low, symbolic, easy to cross, because the people who work this land learned 70 years ago that boundaries divide, but land unifies. 3,200 acres in 1956, 4,500 acres today, one piece of land that proved cooperation works. One ecosystem that demonstrated diversity creates strength. One community that learned to see the ground beneath their feet as what it actually is. Not property, not wealth, not possession, but home, foundation, future. One piece of land. 10 families that became 17. Decades of survival that became generations of thriving. And the land, patient and permanent, continues. Teaching anyone willing to learn that the ground beneath our feet doesn't divide us. It connects us. If we're brave enough to see it,